Hi, I'm Rachel Beck, a senior consultant at mbaMission, and I'm here today to talk to you about the HBS interviews, strategies for success. So I work at mbaMission, and we are a leading admissions consulting firm, and we're the highest rated firm on GMAT Club. I have been at mbaMission since 2011. I'm a graduate of Columbia School of Business as well as Columbia School of Journalism. I loved business school so much that I was an alumni interviewer for Columbia for 8 years. I'm also a longtime journalist, so I come from a strong writing and editing background and have a lot of experience interviewing other people. Now let's get started. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to first give you a little foundation in just interviews in general. We'll then talk about the structure of the HBS interviews, how you can prepare, what kinds of questions you can expect. We'll talk about the post-interview reflections that you're required to do after your interview, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about mbaMission and the resources that we have for you. So the foundation of an interview. So I hear from clients all the time, I'm so scared for my interview. What are they going to ask me? And the truth is most interviews are not stressful at all. Remember, you're talking about your own experiences. So the goal here is to be yourself and let your personality come through. You want to build a rapport with the interviewer. The interview is so much about fit. They want to see if you're somebody that they want to have in the classroom sitting next to them, have part of the alumni network, leading clubs with them, whatever it might be. So they're trying to see if you're somebody that they want to hang out with. So just remember that. Something really important is to not over prepare for your interviews. You never want to come into an interview and sound robotic, like you've memorized all the answers. And when my clients prepare and they send me written things that they've tried to put together, I always say, I don't want to read it, and please just delete the file, because that's not going to help you at all. You want your stories to come off naturally. You want to be able to really resonate with the interviewer. Dee Leopold, who was the longtime head of admissions at Harvard Business School, that once you get to this interview stage, the interview decision is no longer about whether you are qualified. You are qualified to get into Harvard Business School. They want to know if you're the right fit. And the only way they can tell that is if they see the real you, not this over-rehearsed version of you, as you can see on the slide. Therefore, we want you to know your story, and we want you to be confident in how to answer the questions. And today we're really going to take you through how you can do that. So at mbaMission, we have a lot of resources when it comes to interviews. We have our interview primers, which do a deep dive in any of the schools you're looking at, HBS included. We have our insider guides, which give you a great view of schools, HBS included. We have a great interview chapter in our start to finish guide, which gives you a nice high level view of how to approach interviews. And we also have a lot of posts on our blog, the mbaMission blog. So check those out on our website. So what is the structure of the HBS interview? Well, it is a comprehensive interview. Usually it's held by the AdCom member, an AdCom member or an alumni interviewer. When we say comprehensive, it means they've read your application thoroughly. A blind interview is offered by a lot of schools, and that the interviewer in those cases have only seen your resume, but not at HBS. They are going to do a deep dive into your application, and they're going to develop a list of questions about you. This is not an inquisition. They're not there saying, well, why did you do this? No, that's not what they're doing. They're going to be targeting certain aspects of your profile. They're going to be digging into your stories and the decisions you've made across your life and your career. So I always tell my clients, you know these stories. You just have to step back and think, why and how did I make those decisions? And if you do that, you will be fine in this interview. So we like to just give some examples of like a sample interview sequence if you were doing a comprehensive interview. So let's say the client formerly worked at Goldman and then moved to Google. So maybe the interviewer asks, how did you adjust to such a different culture from one company to the next? How did you assess the risk of leaving Goldman early? Who did you consult as you made the choice? Again, this is the hows and whys of your decisions. Were you concerned about disappointing anybody? wow, that's an interesting thing. Maybe I did disappoint my manager at Goldman, who had really been shepherding me along. What would you say to your CEO if you had 30 minutes? What would I say? So those are things to think about. Just more general questions like what might motivate you? What do you like to do for fun? That comes up a lot at HBS. How would you explain your current position to a 10-year-old? What's something in your life, a weakness that you might want to work on? What else can you add? So that could be a very, very typical line of questioning at HBS where you can see they're digging in a little. It's not just on the surface about decisions that you've made across your life and your career. So how can you prepare for a comprehensive interview? So first of all, enter the mind of the interviewer. Don't we always want to get into their mind? We want to know what they're thinking. Think, am I likable? Am I approachable? Am I friendly? You want to come across as mature and friendly and personable and professional. Like those are the strong traits you want to show. Are you who you are? Are you who you say you are on paper? Meaning you might have this unbelievable application and then you get in the room and you're a dud. No, you never want that to happen. You want to really live up to the application that you've submitted. And again, remember, go back to what Dee Leopold said. If you've reached the interview stage, you are qualified. They really like you, but they want to learn more about you. And you also want to show them that you're excited about the program, that you're not just like talking in this, monotone voice, like, yeah, I'm really excited to be here, but like, wow, I spent this incredible day on campus and I had lunch with so-and-so and I attended this class, and it really shows your excitement about the program. So how do you get really prepared for this? So first of all, know your story. And we've been talking about that a little bit already. And how do you know your story? Reread your essays, reread your resume. You have to step back and think, what do I want the interviewer to remember about me? What's really important? I tell my clients to take out their resume and literally go bullet by bullet and ask themselves, okay, what is the accomplishment here that I wrote on my resume? How did I get to that accomplishment? Was there a setback before I reached that accomplishment? Was I part of a team when I reached that accomplishment? What was my role in reaching that accomplishment? What could I have done better? How did that impact my life, my career? If you do that exercise, and sometimes that takes a week to do because you're doing each bullet point. It might take every night you do 2 or 3 bullets. Over the course of the week, you really are refreshing your memory about the stories that you've put forth. Also, know the school. Check out its blogs, any school press releases. You want to just be knowledgeable. If they rolled out a new course of study, you want to know about it before you show up on campus. If they built a new building, if there's a new study abroad trip, you want to know about it. We already went over this a little, but I want to reinforce it. Practice, but don't rehearse. You do not want to sound scripted during an interview, especially for HBS, where they want to see that you're flexible in how you approach the questions that they ask. So if you're so scripted and try to practice interview answers or interview the answers to questions on interviews, you're going to get a question that you're not going to be able to fit one of your answers in, and then you're going to stumble. So instead, if they ask you something, you can take a second and kind of collect your thoughts and answer it. I also suggest to my clients to have a friend read their application and see things that stand out to that friend. They might notice things that you gloss over now because you know your story so well. So that's a good way to kind of get that outside perspective, and I think that can really pay off. Also, view your stories through different lenses, and I was getting to that when I was talking about going through each bullet on your resume. So let's just say we have a person here who spends 1 day a week tutoring inmates for the GED. So there's lots of different storylines that she could pull from that experience. How have you taught those who are junior to you? Describe a role model. How would you contribute to our school? Tell me about a time when you influenced others. Describe a time when you were surprised by feedback that you received. What was the feedback? Why were you surprised? What accomplishment are you most proud of and why? So you could get asked any of those questions and you could pull in some of that story. So just understand that. a big piece of advice that I have for interviews is don't repeat stories. So if they asked you the question, how would you contribute to our school? And one of the things you talked about was that you have this great mentorship through this tutoring of inmates for the GED, and that was such a powerful experience. Then when you get a question, what accomplishment are you most proud of and why, you shouldn't go back to the GED tutoring story. You should come up with another story. So that's why the exercise of going through your resume line by line and kind of thinking, what are my best teamwork stories? What are my best accomplishments? What are my best weaknesses or worst weaknesses? And building kind of a bench of stories that you can turn to. Another important thing for HBS is to be up to date on current events relating to your career and your interests. So you want to really keep up on the news for your industry, because HBS at times will ask you a very pointed question relating to some trend or some news event that happened. For instance, as I mentioned here, if you work in an insurance company's VC arm, then you should probably be versed in the current trends, such as CVS's acquisition of Aetna, right? So you want to be able to answer a question knowing something about the area that you're working in or an area that your career goal is in. Remember how important the case method is to Harvard. I mean, this is the base of the education at Harvard. And so Harvard, during their interviews, is trying to sniff out what you're going to bring to the classroom. And with the case method, you build a class as you go. So you want to demonstrate that you can engage in that kind of environment. So during the interview, you want to be an active listener. You want to show that you're flexible, as I mentioned before. You want to make thoughtful comments. You might want to pull in something, like if you mention something, not a story, but if you mention something previously, you might want to make a connection to that as you're answering something else. That's just the way the case method works in the classroom, and you want to show HBS that you're very, very capable in that environment. Again, this is where rehearsing doesn't work for you, because you're too focused on answering the question in the way you thought it was asked versus what the question is. So what kind of questions are they going to ask? And we went over some of them with the Goldman Google example, but here are some that I think are important to tackle. So what are your goals? Again, we want that thoughtful answer. We don't want I'm going to start at the bottom here. We don't want an answer that doesn't tie anything together. So if you said, I want to work at a firm like GE or UTC and ultimately rise through the ranks and become CEO, that doesn't tell the listener anything. So, but if you said, as a banker, I worked on a variety of restructurings, typically with industrial firms. While working on the financing side, I was impressed by the management teams that came in and righted the ship. I'm hoping to join a rotational program at an industrial firm like GE or UTC, where I would start my career on a leadership track and position myself. So this is a kind of question that you can think about ahead of time, right? You should always be able to answer what your goals are and really think, how can I tie my past to my future? Even if you're completely changing careers, you kind of have to be able to drop the crumbs from what you've done in the past to why you need an MBA to what you want to do in the future. When you're getting the leadership or team questions, they usually come in a behavioral style question, like tell me about a time. So you want to really tell a story in these cases, and we like to talk about the STAR method. S stands for the situation, T stands for the task, A for the action, and R for the result. So you don't want to just tell a story and leave off the result, which I would say in all of the years that I've prepped clients on for interviews, they often leave off the R, which is why I always go back to the STAR method. You're never going to mention the STAR method. You're just going to dive in, but know that you've captured the S, the T, the A, and the R. So you don't want, again, I'm going to start at the bottom. I was challenged when I coached kids, but I stood up to some tough parents and they ultimately listened to reason and everyone had a good time. That story doesn't tell us anything except the situation. I was challenged. But the way you should go is, when I started coaching kids soccer, I imagined that it would be a lot of fun and games, of course. What I didn't imagine was that I would have parents calling my house, complaining about each other's kids. After the first week of phone calls, I announced that we would have a parents' meeting and laid out the parental rules of conduct. So it's a much better, more narrative approach, and it really captures the story. And you want to keep reading in that sense, and that's really important. And you want to keep listening as the interviewer. In my many years of doing interviews for Columbia, which were blind interviews, I found when people told stories that I wanted to keep listening, I found those applicants to be much more interesting. So keep that in mind. So here's another example, which is tell me about a time when you showed initiative. After about a year after I started ABC Company, I realized we had grown very fast. The accounting department had tripled in size, which was exciting. But at the same time, we were losing the sense of family that ABC had been known for. So I decided on my own to get it back. That's the situation. I thought about different ways to do that and finally hit on starting a department-wide intranet that would let us stay connected even while we were at client sites. So that was the task at hand. First, I sent out a survey asking what individual boards people would want. Then I worked with IT to create. Then I organized a launch event. That was the action. This is what I did. Today, we have 14 separate boards ranging from recipe exchanges to technical advice. Every employee has logged in at least 4 times a week for the past year. Our turnover is the lowest at ABC, and on our last client survey, we received multiple comments on team cohesiveness. So that's a great result, right? So you want to always get to R. Keep that in mind. Harvard often asks applicants to discuss a weakness. And people get very, very, very nervous when they hear a weakness question. They feel like they're going to have to kind of bear all. So we believe that it's important to acknowledge a real weakness, but it doesn't have to be like I cheated on a test. That's not a real weakness. But you want to acknowledge a real weakness, describe its impact, explain the steps that you've taken to improve, and then prove that improvement, demonstrate or prove that improvement. We call it the WISP method. So you just keep that in mind, just like STAR, you're never gonna say it, but in your head, you're gonna think about it. So here's an example. So I tend to think and speak quickly, which I think is a plus in many situations, but this quickness sometimes causes me to interrupt others. Okay, that's a weakness. If you're an interrupter, it's a weakness. Because of this, I can come across as dismissive and as though I'm not listening. And junior team members have felt like I don't hear or value their ideas. So there's a real impact there, right? People are saying that because I sometimes interrupt others, I'm not really listening. I got feedback in my mid-year review and agreed it was accurate. I read up on techniques to remind myself to slow down. I even wore a rubber band on my wrist on meeting days and snapped it if I started to interrupt. Okay, and now we're up to what they actually did. I'm never going to be perfect, but I know I've gotten better. Several junior team members have noticed the difference too and told me that my willingness to work on my own weakness has made me more relatable and trustworthy to them. So that's not a weakness that is so terrible, but it is a weakness that really shows that you did things to kind of overcome the weakness, and that's important. So Harvard often asks applicants to talk about things that are not work related or don't fit into like a particular mold. And those are things like, what do you do for fun? What's your favorite hobby? What company do you admire? Things like that. So you want to just be prepared for those fun things. And there's no right or wrong answer there. You want to just show things that are important to you. When they ask you what your favorite hobby is, don't say like, I like reading, blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's your favorite hobby, but like you want to show that you're an interesting person and maybe you love adventure travel. Maybe you're somebody who loves having, colleagues over and cooking big dinners. Whatever it is, just show that you're somebody who is kind of connected to other things in society, and that's really important. There are times, in fact, that you could then tie your answer to one of the school's resources or activities, but you don't have to do that. But know that if there was something very obvious, you could. So when you get to the end of the interview at HBS, they might ask you, do you have any questions for us? And it really depends on how long you've gone and if the interviewer is somebody who's going to carve out that last 2 minutes or not. If you don't get asked to ask any questions, don't worry about it, but you should have some prepared just in the back of your head. Remember that at Harvard, you're interviewing with typically somebody who's part of the AdCom or an experienced alumni. So that will just help you kind of frame out your questions. So you don't want to ask a question like, what was your favorite part of Harvard? Because they might not have gone to Harvard. So we like the idea of observation and confirmation. So here's an example. Something that really struck me every time I visited is that the faculty seem to develop really close connections to students. They're on a first name basis. I see them sitting together in the cafeteria, etc. So that's your observation. Has that been your experience too? So that's the confirmation. So that's a question that somebody who's in the AdCom or an alumni could answer. You could also be what we call like a thoughtful consumer. So do your research. Again, go onto the school website, look at new things that have come out. Like Dean X has been in place for X amount of years now. How has its impact been felt? Again, you're just showing that you're connected to the school, that you're preparing yourself. And what happens if you get stumped? It's okay. That's what happens. Take your time, grab a sip of water. You can take a minute to collect your thought. You can also ask, can you repeat the question? I just want to think about it for another minute. That's okay. There's usually no right or wrong answer. You just need to give an intelligent response. So remember that as well. If you're really, really stumped, which hopefully you won't be, you can ask to move on and say, I want to just keep thinking about that and let's come back to it at the end. But you should be able to kind of collect your thoughts within a minute or two and move on without an issue. So now we're leading up to the post-interview reflection. So after you have your interview, you get 24 hours to do this post-interview reflection and submit it to Harvard. This started a few years ago, and it's a way for Harvard to kind of get your view of how things went. So what I like to suggest to my clients is before you're arriving at your interview, in the weeks before, go look back on your resume and your essays and think what else you would want to convey to the AdCom. So are there one or two things, one or two stories that you didn't get to tell that you think really needs to be in there? Is there something that you really want to like reinforce in your profile? And jot those down. In fact, create like a Word document in your computer so you just kind of have those on hand and you know that you want to kind of potentially revisit them if they work. If you interview on campus at Harvard, which a lot of people do, you will likely also have a class visit. You might have a lunch or breakfast with students and administrators. You might attend a session where there's a panel discussion. After each thing you do, take some notes on what you've learned and how it can relate to your story. So you're just kind of building your story about your time there. Right after the interview is over, find a place to sit down and write down what you talked about, things that you might want to touch on in this post-interview reflection, and things that you feel like you didn't get to say. And that will just kind of help you when you go sit down to actually write the post-interview reflection that you've taken these initial notes. Most importantly, don't overwrite. This isn't supposed to be like a perfect piece of writing. It's supposed to be about 500 or 600 words, and it's supposed to touch on points of the interview and also give you the opportunity to introduce some new experiences or ideas if needed, only if needed. I usually like to coach my clients to begin this essay with, a big thank you to the interviewer and a little detail about kind of the conversation that went on, and then have 2 or 3 more paragraphs kind of talking about your experience during the interview and also your experience in wanting to go to Harvard Business School. So now I'll tell you a little bit about mbaMission. And then we'll wrap up for today. So mbaMission is the leading admissions consulting firm. We have a team of full-time consultants with elite MBA experience. Everyone went to a top MBA program, and we all do this full-time. 52 weeks a year, we are focused on MBA admissions. We've helped thousands upon thousands of clients get into their dream business schools. We have a great HBS interview primer that you can download, and it's terrific. We also offer a 30-minute free consultation. So if you happen to have a question about anything relating to your interview, you can schedule a free 30-minute call with any of our consultants and we can help steer you. Thanks so much for tuning in. We wish you the best of luck.